I was born on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1934, an only child at the time, and I weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces at birth. And it was evident that the only name chosen for me, which was John David, was not suitable. Therefore, it was necessary that my parents choose a name befitting a girl. Since it required some time to decide on an agreeable name, there was no name recorded on my birth certificate at the time. In search of a name, quite a number of people were interviewed, and many said, "No, don't name her that." Everybody's named that. And of course, my grandmother, everybody wanted to name a baby after her, but Mother thought that was too many Sues. So therefore, because everybody was Sue in some form or another, including my Aunt Susie, and then my cousin Susie Lee, and another cousin Sue, and then there was later on Patty Sue, and, so there were others. So they ruled that one out, and there was acquaintance of ours admitted that she had always loved her name, and she was the only one that stated that, and that was, she was a nurse at the hospital where I was born. Therefore, it was decided I would be given that name, which was Nell Maurine, spelled Maurine, versus the Irish spelling, which is Maureen, and most people spell it like that. But as to my temperament, I was shy and retiring, and would cling to my mother, and, but as a small child, I was my daddy's delight, and his little sugar plum, he called me. And so as I told Mother, I remember that I was going to marry Daddy when I grew up. She was very amused at this. And once when Daddy was sent on a business trip, I told Mother we were two little lovebirds, and now one of them has flown away. I actually got sick because I had never been apart from my mother and Daddy, and he was away for probably a week, which seemed like forever to me, I remember we went on a picnic for a last time together before he was sent away. That was something new, as he worked at the General Electric Company for 35 years. But most of the time he didn't travel, but by the time I was about 6, I guess, they began to send him on little business trips for a week or two. And he would go to Shreveport, Louisiana. He'd go to Lubbock, Texas, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and San Antonio, Texas, and so he was. There were about 6 or 8 different places that they would send him, and so I was late beginning school since my birthday was in November. So I was almost 7 when I started, but Mother had gotten little workbooks and things for me, and so I was already reading when I started to school. And they wanted to, when they found out that I was reading, I was taken to the principal's office to read for her, and the little reader that we had, was Jane, see Jane run, and all those, that family, see Spot and all that. So I read through about half of that book while she listened and saw me, and so my teacher then, they didn't promote me out of the first grade because there was no kindergarten at that time, so you began first grade. And that was at Obadiah Night School, which was about a couple of blocks from our house. I could easily walk there, because that's the only transportation that I had. And So my teacher, Miss Thomas, allowed me to be her assistant along with another advanced student, because he was had moved to America from Europe, and I think he may have been a little bit older, but was, I guess, learning English and all. His name was Sahula, Ignatius Sahula, and they called him Iggy for short. And so he and I were allowed to be her assistants and put words up on a device she had so the children could learn to recognize the words that were used and all. And that was the way she was teaching reading. And but I was frail and prone to getting respiratory problems when I was coming up, so I would begin school, and then a few weeks in I would get sick, and since the doctor had admonished my mother not to allow me to get sick, well, she would keep me home, but she always provided me with the current materials that we were covering at school so that I was able to keep up with the work. And so then I would go back from time to time when I could, but usually I missed most of the school year. I'd start at the beginning and then was out for a great deal of the time. Then towards the end, I would go back again and finish up. But there was no problem with that until when I was in the 7th grade, I think it was, beginning. Well, they began to pay tuition daily for those who attended, each child, and so it was a money thing, and they stopped giving me grades at that time because they put on my report card on each 6-week period, they would write across it, absent too much for grades, and therefore it was decided that if I wasn't going to get my grades, there was no sense in going there and wasting time. So that was when my homeschool situation began with the Calvert course from out of Baltimore, Maryland, which was, they had devised that for military and missionary children, I believe. And so it was an outstanding curriculum. It was really wonderful and better than anything I had at the public schools, even though Obadiah Night was excellent. But then when we moved, when I was 10, about to start the 5th grade, we moved to a rural area, Irving, Texas at that time. Later it became a metropolis, which is a part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and that's actually where the Dallas Cowboys Stadium began and all. But it was just a small truck farming community when we moved out there to a 10-acre tract, which had no improvement on it. And World War II began when I was 7 years old. I had just had my 7th birthday on November 11th, and the war began in early December. And I remember the day that my daddy always had the radio on, and so the president came on. They made the announcement that Pearl Harbor was attacked, and so we had the 4 years of war with all the rationings and everything that went with it, But anyway, towards the close of the war, we moved to that rural area, and there was no school nearby. We were 5 miles out of Irving proper, and where the school was, and so there was another little rural school, but it was Mother didn't think that my health would permit my going to that environment, so they paid tuition for me to go to Irving School, and so that was where I began, and it was quite different. The children were different than the city children I had known, and and so but I became acquainted, and my teacher was one of two fifth-grade teachers who were sisters, and their last name was Trigg, and mine was Miss Margaret Trigg, and her sister was Miss Martha Trigg, and they both taught fifth grade. And so our classroom was on the third floor of an old red brick building. We had to climb up and down the stairs, and it was so old until I think one side of it was condemned because the floor was slanty and they couldn't use it. So we were on the side that was usable. And I remember having fire drills and all, where we would go up and down the stairs. And Miss Trigg had quite a temper with her Irish. She had a beautiful florid complexion, and she'd get bright red when she was upset because she had some of the students should have been in high school. I think there were several boys that were in their teens already, I think, and so they were tended to kind of be unruly, and so she had a paddle that she kept right there, and she would administer the discipline in front of the class, and I'd sit there trembling. And she would say to us, she called us people, what are you people doing sitting there with your teeth in your mouth? And I never had heard that expression before. So anyway, she was very colorful, but she was good to me, and she would say, Nell gets her work, and she's not here much, but she stays up with her work. Y'all are here every day, and you can't get yours. What's the matter with you people? So anyway, she was sweet, and her sister, I think, had a milder temperament, but I really didn't know her that well. I just saw her from time to time. And there was no cafeteria as we had at Obadiah Night. We had a nice lunchroom where I would get soup every day because that's what I wanted, was vegetable soup. And it would come with a little pack of crackers. And then I had got, a sweet milk, a white milk, and sometimes an ice cream for dessert. And that was all I wanted. So, but here, when we moved to Irving, there was no eating facility in that school, whatever. But there was, across the street, there was a hamburger place where the school team was the Tigers, so they named it Tiger's Den. And we would go over there, and you could buy a hamburger and a little bag of Fritos and a Coke, and that would be our lunch. And so that was what I had, but I liked hamburgers anyway, so that suited me fine. And so that was, when I was in school, that was what I had mostly for lunch. Some of the children brought their lunch, but that was not something that we wanted to do, so I just get lunch, and it wasn't that expensive. I can't remember what I paid, but there'd be a huge crowd, when the bell would ring, and all the older children would come, and there was such a press. You did well not to get crushed, with everybody trying to get up to the counter at once and order their food. That was quite an experience. And then at Obadiah Night, we had a playground teacher, and I remember my teacher I remember her very well. She would lead us in games like Drop the Handkerchief, or things that ring around the rosy, and different little games that we would participate in, and that was a lot of fun. But with the war, when it started, she left and joined the Navy, I remember, and so I don't think we had a playground teacher after that. I don't know that they replaced her, but anyway, that was a nice place. But at Irving, the rural school, they didn't have anything like that. There was no structured help with, you just went outside and did whatever, outside and played around. But I do remember that they organized a game of Red Rover a few times, and that was a really rough game. And I remember that the girl that I was standing next to in the line got such a grip on she was determined that nobody was coming through, and one of the older boys determined he was going to get through, so he came through in such a rough manner that it sprained my wrist because she was holding on. She wouldn't let go, and so I had my wrist sprained. And another time, I think it was the same boy, took my hand and twisted it, and I sprained my other wrist, so I had two damaged wrists. So Mother was kind of happy to get me out of that kind of rough environment, because I wasn't one to participate in those things and play in that manner. So anyway, the school course that I had, I loved the new materials, and I remember one day some of the teachers came out to visit afterwards, and Mother said they were probably researching to make sure I was in school somehow, and so I brought out my school materials and showed them, and there was nothing they could say because it was so much better than what I got at Irving. And when I did go to school, I had to, sometimes I rode, because we moved away. Well, at the beginning there was a school bus that ran, and we were at the end of the line, or the beginning, depending on whether you were leaving to go to school or coming home from school. And that was, so I'd be like the first or second one on the bus, and then the very last one or two going home. And that was an experience, and that would be so crowded until there was standing room only when they packed them in at the beginning of the route. And I remember one day there was, I guess, a rough place in the road, and one of the older, I guess he was a high school boy, hit his head on something that was protruding from the ceiling of the bus, and his head was bleeding. I remember that. And anyway, of course, it was cold, and I'd have to stand out and wait for the bus, so my daddy built me a little shelter to stand and wait in until the bus came, to kind of keep me from freezing. And of course, Mother always saw to it that I was dressed very warmly, even at Obadiah night when I had to walk back and forth to school, and so she dressed me in underwear to begin with, and then I'd have sweaters and then a coat on top of that, and if it was raining, a raincoat on top of that, and galoshes on my feet, and then an umbrella overhead, big black umbrella. And my teacher, I was in the 3rd grade by that time, and she made much of that because we had a story in our reader about the big black umbrella, and she said, Nell has a big black umbrella. And she also, we didn't change classes in that year, that was the 3rd grade, but she had some events and things, and she loved the Lord, I'm sure, and she would have little Christmas programs for us to do, and she had me sing a Christmas song, which was to the tune of Brahms' Lullaby, and she told my mother that I had a sweet little voice, and also she came up with a contest for the girls' dolls, and everybody would bring their doll, and Mother had bought me this beautiful and expensive Madame Alexander doll, which was a well-known doll, and so the different categories she had, like a baby doll and the different young lady dolls. Well, this one was a young lady doll, but there was really no category. It was out of, and so she made up a category and awarded a red ribbon for her first place, because she was so beautiful, and with golden hair and a beautiful dress and a plume on her hat and everything. So anyway, when I was one of the things that I had was some childhood diseases like chicken pox, and another time with the measles, and my tonsils were very bad, and Mother had to go to the Lord with that problem, because no one would take my tonsils out. They said, no, it's too risky. We better to be safe than sorry. Every one of them would say that. And so she didn't know what to do. So I was under a pediatrician who was head of the Southwestern Pediatric Society, a wonderful, precious, gentle doctor, Dr. Hugh Leslie Moore. And then I also had a fine ear, nose, and throat specialist, Dr. Oscar Marchman, and I would go to one back and forth to an appointment from one to the other, and they'd each say, better be safe than sorry, because I was running some temperature. And so one day I had an appointment with Dr. Moore to get me checked out again, see if I could maybe be eligible for the surgery. And Dr. Marchman had his own way of removing tonsils, which was bloodless. He called it rolling them out. It's kind of like peeling a section off of an orange, I think, or something to that effect. But anyway, he wouldn't even do that. And it better be safe than sorry. So that day, I remember she was polishing my shoes to get ready to go to Dr. Moore. And she got out on her knees and said, Lord, I can't handle these doctors and nurses, but you can. And so she committed it to him, and then we went on for my appointment and went in, and he had a wonderful place. His waiting room had toys and play equipment and things that, interest children, and I loved to go there, and he would always have a little gift for me every time when I would leave. So that day they went and were doing the usual testing, and I remember he came out and he had a funny look on his face, and he said, well, I don't know what happened, but she tests out perfect. She can have the surgery on Wednesday or whenever it was, So that was an answer to prayer. And so I went in, and it wasn't done in a hospital. It was done right in Dr. Marchman's offices. And I remember the nurse bringing me a little tiny capsule to swallow with some water. And my aunt was there with Mother that day for the operation, and it was to remove my tonsils and adenoids. And so I went out like a light, I guess, after taking that. But they said that I was, my situation was very strange, because I was trying to, it was like I was trying to hit my head on the wall, and I was they had all they could do to hold me. And so anyway, he did the operation and took out my tonsils and adenoids, and I was afraid beforehand to have it because I thought it would hurt. I remember saying, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna hurt. And Mother said, if you'll be brave and agree, well, I will get you. In those days, Gone with the Wind was a movie and all, and they had the paper dolls with the Scarlett O'Hara things, and she said, I'll buy you it was a beautiful Scarlett O'Hara doll, and it was expensive. Mother said, I'll buy you a Scarlett O'Hara doll if you'll do it. So I agreed, and so they got me that beautiful doll. And I remember going home from the clinic in the back seat of the car. I was lying down in there, and of course you could have ice cream, and it didn't take long to recover from that because it was not something where they cut anything, and so after that, well, I began to gain weight because I'd been real thin, and my health improved after that. So that was when I was 5, and so we moved close to where Obadiah Night was, because Mother had researched different schools, and the only other one she saw that would be Ben Milam School. So we settled on Obadiah Night, and I'm so glad we did, because it was really outstanding. In my first years, I had first grade, and then they put me into third since I was reading in advance, and then I had fourth grade, and then we moved away from there to the country. So that was my early experience. And also there was a wonderful church about a block from my school within walking distance, and I would walk over there. And I had a special friend, Patsy Chase, who was a member there, and Brother Colton was a pastor. And I remember Sunday school, I had a sweet teacher, and Miss Johns, and they gave me a Bible and some reading materials to help, some helps, and brought them to my home. And so that was a wonderful church, and I will tell more about my experience in Irving at a later time, so, and from then on.